Let us begin by acknowledging the most terrifying fallacy of the human condition. We do not seek truth to find peace, but to accelerate our inevitable collision with the abyss. The commonly held notion, peddled by the shallow optimists of the age, is that knowledge is illumination and liberation from the dungeons of doubt. I stand before you now, shrouded in the knowledge that knowledge is merely a precise, horrifying measurement of the distance between us and oblivion. You click upon this Shadaladan broadcast, perhaps seeking confirmation of a suspicion that has long gnawed at the periphery of your awareness, that the edifice of consensus reality is fragile, constructed not upon bedrock, but upon the strategically placed ignorance of billions. We spend our lives in the twilight, content with the flickering lamp of the obvious, because the full glare of uncompromised reality is a solvent for the soul. It is a spectacle too vast, too intricate, too indifferent to the pathetic comfort of human mortal. I speak tonight not to philosophers content with their neatly stacked syllogisms, nor to psychologists charting the tame waters of neuroses. I address those who have felt the cold draft emanating from the gaps in the observable universe, those whose dreams possess a fidelity to fear that waking life can never match. The title of our meditation is a warning, etched deep into the lintel of the door we are about to open. Seeing the truth is the first step into madness. We must first define the terms of our self-destruction. What is this truth we speak of? It is not the ephemeral, shifting sand of political fact or social agreement. It is the underlying, immutable geometry of existenti, the terrible, crystalline structure that holds the universe together, and which, when fully perceived, reveals the complete, utter insignificance of the perceiving consciousness. The moment the veil thins, and you catch a glimpse of the mechanism, the gears grinding without mercy or meaning, your personal narrative, your sonata begins to unravel like a cheap shroud. Consider the ordinary man. He thrives because he can filter, distort, and minimize. His brain is a marvelous instrument of self-deception, built to prioritize survival over fidelity. He believes his concerns are monumental, his lifespan an eternity, his decisions possessing cosmic weight. This delusion is the essence of his sanity. But what happens when a mind, perhaps through genius, perhaps through trauma, perhaps through sheer, relentless curiosity, pierces this necessary illusion? He sees, suddenly, the relentless march of entropy. He understands that every particle of matter he touches is merely delaying its inevitable disorganization. He perceives the sheer, dizzying scale of time, rendering all human achievement into a microscopic flicker. He realizes that his emotions, which he cherishes as the core of his identity, are merely chemical echoes of evolutionary pressures long since forgotten. This comprehensive understanding is not enlightenment. It is the instantaneous shattering of the ego. The mind, calibrated for survival within a small, manageable sphere of influence, finds itself adrift in the infinite, freezing void of objectivity. The result is the terrifying elegance of madness. We are about to embark on an exploration into the deep mechanics of perception and the fatal flaw in human consciousness that makes true clarity a death sentence. We will dissect the very nature of reality filtering, examining why the sane choose comfort over comprehension, and why the truly clear-sighted are so often confined or, worse, ignored as their truth is simply too dangerous for the maintenance of the common order. Prepare yourselves, for the journey is steep, and the footing is unreliable. The descent begins now, into the turbulent heart of the maelstrom, where perception drowns. Nós devemos falar francamente sobre a arquitetura da mente, essa câmara claustrofóbica, onde abrigamos nossa consciência transitória. A suposição comum é que nossos sentidos são repórteres fiéis, retransmitindo o mundo como ele é. Mas esta é a fraude fundamental, sobre a qual a sanidade é construída. A retina, o tímpano, o nervo tátil, eles não são janelas. Eles são sensores especializados, projetados não para capturar o todo, mas para extrair apenas a informação mínima viável necessária para que o organismo sobreviva ao próximo nascer do sol. A catarata pura e avassaladora de dados que nos assalta a cada momento de vigília é impiedosamente eliminada, compactada e interpretada por uma vasta e inconsciente máquina editorial. O que chamamos de ver é, na verdade, um ato hipereficiente de não ver. Percebemos categorias, não detalhes. Preferimos a previsão à observação direta. A mente abomina o cru, o não classificado, o verdadeiramente único, porque esses elementos exigem esforço e retardam a fuga do predador, seja ele uma besta literal ou o espectro ameaçador do terror existencial. Somos mestres do atalho cognitivo, e essa eficiência é nossa maior vulnerabilidade quando buscamos a verdade. Imagine, se quiser, a alma desafortunada, vamos chamá-lo de inquisidor, que se vê subitamente despojado desses filtros vitais. Ele sai de seus confins mentais habituais e começa a perceber as leis imutáveis que governam a dança microscópica dos átomos, ou as trajetórias frias e indiferentes de galáxias distantes. Suas ansiedades anteriores, o medo da pobreza, a picada de um desprezo, a busca por prazeres fugazes diminuem, não em trivialidades, mas em irrelevâncias completas. E este, precisamente, é o momento da crise. A sanidade exige uma hierarquia de preocupações, uma escala significativa. Mas a verdade, quando vista sem distorção, não possui hierarquia em relação ao observador. Ela simplesmente é a morte de uma estrela e o colapso de um ácaro. São fenômenos de igual e elegante necessidade mecânica. Quando o inquisidor compreende essa igualdade, ele perde a capacidade de priorizar sua própria sobrevivência, sua própria felicidade ou seus próprios apegos. Eleube os fios, mas percebe que os bonecos dançando abaixo estão convencidos de sua própria vontade. E pior, eles olham para ele com suspeita e pena. O tremor psicológico resultante é uma forma de vertigem existencial, uma Elster M de percepção. O inquisidor começa a questionar a consistência da própria causalidade. Se tudo é meramente uma cascata determinística de energia, onde reside a liberdade? Onde reside o amado eu que deveria ser o capitão deste navio em ruínas? O reconhecimento da futilidade determinística é uma forma profunda e arrepiante de autoaniquilação. É a perda de agência, seguida rapidamente pela dissolução da identidade. E aqui reside a beleza macabra da verdadeira quebra intelectual. Ela é frequentemente acompanhada por uma clareza estranha. O louco, tendo-se desfeito da necessidade de interpretação baseada na sobrevivência, pode frequentemente perceber padrões, conexões e estruturas subjacentes que o são. Cegado por suas limitações pragmáticas, perde completamente. Ele pode ver a progressão matemática em uma folha que cai, ou a natureza cíclica e arrepiante da loucura social, ou o momento preciso em que a luz da consciência se extinguirá nos olhos de sua amada. Ele sabe dessas verdades, mas não pode comunicá-las, porque a linguagem do desespero objetivo não é reconhecida por aqueles que ainda se agarram à esperança subjetiva. Ele é simultaneamente o observador mais claro e o prisioneiro mais isolado. O isolamento gera profunda melancolia, pois ele vê o mundo correndo em direção à inevitável decadência, belo navio carregado de tolos, navegando confiantemente em direção ao horizonte negro e ele está amarrado ao mastro, incapaz de gritar um aviso que seria entendido como qualquer coisa além dos gritos incoerentes do delírio. Essa consciência, essa conexão profunda e aterrorizante com a realidade da perda universal, transforma a sabedoria em uma forma lenta e arrepiante de deterioração interna. We arrive now at the exquisite anguish of insight. For the man who sees the mechanism, the burden is not merely intellectual. It is deeply physiological, a corrosive clarity that attacks the very foundations of subjective well-being. This is the stage where the philosophical realization begins to manifest as a maddening physical drumbeat. Within the chest, the sound of the telltale heart, pounding out the relentless rhythm of inevitable decay and ultimate silence. The price of abandoning filters is the loss of emotional insulation. The inquisitor, having stripped away the comfortable mythology of human suddenly finds himself hyper-attuned to the suffering of the world, not merely as an empathic response, but as a direct perception of universal error. He sees the systemic inefficiencies, the cyclical follies of ambition, the necessary cruelty built into the reproductive survival engine, and the terrifying, cold beauty of predation. He recognizes that every moment of joy is fundamentally contingent, built upon a temporary exclusion of pain, and every pursuit of permanence is an exercise in magnificent futility. This radical honesty destroys the utility of self. When the mind fully comprehends the terminal nature of existence, the finality, the lack of celestial judge, the purely biological, and the vital, irrational impulse to strive falters. Why fight entropy when entropy is the fundamental law? Why accumulate fleeting status when the timeline of the universe renders every monument to dust instantaneously? The world becomes a vast, beautifully designed machine, manufacturing perishable goods, and the spectator, having seen the blueprints, can no longer join the frantic assembly line. What defines the result in madness is not delusion, quite the opposite. It is the overwhelming, suffocating reality of non-delusion. The mind is afflicted by hyperreality, where the noise of the obvious is replaced by the silent, crushing weight of what truly is. This is why the fully conscious individual retreats. They cannot bear the cacophony of small talk built on great, universally accepted lies. They cannot participate in the celebration of achievements that are meaningless in the cold light of infinity. They become exiles in their own species, their silence mistaken for their profound insight classified as pathological detachment. This loneliness is the ultimate consequence of unfettered perception. The sane world demands conformity to illusion, demanding that you nod politely when they speak of eternity, destiny, or inherent meaning. The Inquisitor cannot nod. His honesty is involuntary, a twitching nerve exposed to the atmosphere. If you have followed this exploration thus far, if you feel the cold grasp of recognition tightening around your own throat, if the very fabric of comforting reality seems to shimmer and tear at the edges of your vision, you are no longer merely a spectator. You are a participant in this dangerous clarity. You are, too, trapped in this web of mystery, seeking the horrifying logic that dictates our fate. Should this descent resonate with the darkest, most analytical chambers of your spirit, then grant a momentary, symbolic affirmation of this shared darkness. Lend your hand to the shadows we explored by subscribing to this channel, thereby acknowledging your own inevitable path toward uncomfortable truth. Let the algorithm know that there are others willing to confront the chilling, undeniable facts of our existence. For in our shared pursuit of the terrifying, perhaps we find a fleeting, macabre community. Having addressed the internal hemorrhage caused by truth, we must now move to the external structures that actively prevent our sight. The deepest levels of delusion are not accidental. They are woven into the very grammar of our shared experience. We are protected by three great veils: the illusion of time, the dogma of free will, and the meticulously constructed myth of self. It is time to dissect these grand, necessary lies. The profoundest irony of our existence is our relentless commitment to measurement the clock, the calendar, the ledger, all devices designed to map and contain the boundless, swirling chaos of existence. Yet, in our dedication to precision, we construct the greatest enigma: time itself. We perceive time as a linear river, flowing inexorably from a fixed past into a predictable future. This linearity is not a property of the cosmos. It is a critical neurolinguistic necessity for sequential thought and organized action. Without it, planning is impossible, survival a frantic accident. But the mind that begins to truly see quickly perceives the fraud of chronological sequence. The Inquisitor, having breached the walls of pragmatic perception, understands time not as an arrow, but as a vast, simultaneous ocean. Past, present, and future exist merely as facets of a single, crystalline block of spacetime, a structure where every event, every birth, every catastrophe, every whispered secret is eternally fixed and coexisting. To truly grasp this simultaneity is to shatter the illusion of waiting, of anticipation, of genuine surprise. When one views existence as a pre-recorded loop, where all outcomes are already inscribed in the geometry of the universe, the concept of free will becomes the next grand illusion to crumble into dust. The ordinary man clings to his decisions, believing himself the sovereign architect of his fate. He sees choices as bifurcations, forks in the road of possibility. The enlightened lunatic, however, sees every choice as merely the perception of a choice, a complex biochemical reaction determined by preceding events, stretching back to the dawn of creation. There is no freedom, only mechanism. We are magnificent automata, our every tremor and passion merely the necessary consequence of deterministic laws. This realization is profoundly corrosive to the human spirit because it obliterates the very basis of moral judgment, praise, and blame. If all actions are predetermined, then virtue and sin lose their ethical weight, transforming instead into mere biological classifications of behavior. The mind desperately searches for a sanctuary, a sliver of the self that transcends this cold, causal chain. And here we confront the third, perhaps most terrifying, illusion, the myth of self. We construct an I, a cohesive, continuous, narrative identity, out of memory, expectation, and transient emotion. This self is a necessary fiction, the protagonist of the personal story that the mind tells itself to maintain cohesion. But the truth seeker quickly finds that this I is ephemeral, porous, and constantly renegotiated. The self that woke this morning is biologically, emotionally, and chemically distinct from the self that will sleep tonight. It is an emergent property, not a fixed entity. When the Inquisitor turns his gaze inward, seeking the core, unchanging self, he finds only a whirling vortex of processes, an ongoing calculation with no central calculator. The mind, having successfully dismantled the scaffolding of time, free will, and stable identity, recoils in existential terror. If there is no stable self to make meaningful decisions across a linear timeline, then the entire structure of human striving collapses. This intellectual dismantling is not merely depressing, it is structurally disabling. The mechanism of sanity relies on the solidity of these illusions. When they are vaporized by the sheer heat of objectivity, the mind loses its anchor. It is set adrift in the abyss of non-meaning, unable to grasp the significance of its own survival, viewing its own suffering and death with the detached interest of a scientist observing the demise of a foreign specimen. This is the enigma we now hold. The clear-sighted man sees too much, and in that overabundance of vision, he loses the essential human capability to lie to himself. He knows the game is rigged, and thus, he can no longer play. The challenge now is to explore the necessary defense mechanisms society employs to punish and marginalize those who have stumbled upon this agonizing clarity. The descent into radical clarity is often met by the world, not with awe or acknowledgement, but with a swift, defensive hostility. Society is built upon a delicate, interlocking system of shared fictions. When one individual loudly proclaims the falsity of the currency, the fragility of the governance, or the ultimate meaninglessness of the endeavor, he is not merely an inconvenience, he is a virus threatening the entire cognitive infrastructure. The fate of the Inquisitor, the one who truly seizes, often sealed by the very community he seeks to warn or enlighten. We must understand that madness, as defined by the common man, is less a medical diagnosis and more a social designational label applied to those whose internal reality deviates too sharply from the externally mandated narrative. The sane are those who adhere to the accepted lies. The mad are those who insist on uncomfortable truths, or who invent new, unshared lies that fail to serve the collective purpose. The Inquisitor, with his burden of objective reality, is rejected because his truth lacks utility for the survival of the group. Consider the historical precedent. Great seers, prophets, and radical philosophers are often first mocked, then persecuted, and only posthumously elevated to misunderstood geniuses once their destabilizing insights have been safely neutralized by time and selective editing. The immediate reaction is to silence the jarring note. The mind that sees the whole picture is inherently for it cannot partake in the necessary, invigorating passion of parochial conflicts. The man who truly understands the determinism of cause and effect finds himself unable to hate, unable to truly despise an adversary, viewing them instead as a necessary piece in the cold, inevitable machinery. This detachment is seen as coldness, as arrogance, or worse, as moral failure. The mechanisms of societal marginalization are subtle but devastating. First comes the subtle gaslighting, the constant reassurance that the Inquisitor's vivid perceptions are merely stress or overthinking. His clarity is pathetic. The sheer, overwhelming complexity of the universe he perceives as dismissed as a delusion of grandeur, precisely because the magnitude of the truth is too large for the average mind to integrate without psychological self-immolation. Then comes the physical and metaphorical confinement. The sane world, unable to refute the Inquisitor's unsettling analysis of their systems, must contain the messenger. He is locked away not because he is delusional, but because he is contagious. His truth is a threat to the comfortable equilibrium. Within the confines of the asylum or the silent isolation of intellectual ostracization, the Inquisitor is forced to confront the final, crushing irony. His superior perception has rendered him functionally inferior in the world of men. His vision is so broad it cannot focus on the necessary small tasks of survival. This leads us to the terrifying conclusion that sanity is not synonymous with health, but with adaptation. The sane man is simply the one best adapted to live successfully within the confines of a collective dream. The truly clear-sighted man, by contrast, is optimally adapted to the universe, but pathologically maladapted to his species. His fate is sealed. The wider his view, the narrower his cage. We have traversed the self-deception, the intellectual rupture, and the societal reaction. Now, in the fading light of this agonizing clarity, we must turn to the ultimate psychological toll. We must address the moment when the mind, having failed to find a receptive audience, and having exhausted its own capacity for integrating such a vast and sterile truth, begins to cannibalize itself in the profoundest act of intellectual suicide. We stand now at the precipice of the final revelation, where the pursuit of truth culminates not in triumph, but in a sublime, paralyzing despair. The mind of the Inquisitor, now fully saturated with the cold algorithms of the cosmos, reaches a point of informational overload that transcends mere confusion. It becomes a state of ecstatic, terrifying comprehension. This is the climax of The Crow, the moment when the final dreadful synthesis occurs. The greatest agony is the realization that the universe, in its elegant mechanics, is fundamentally devoid of intention regarding humanity. We are not the focus of a grand narrative, neither judged nor cherished. We are simply an intricate, temporary efflorescence of carbon and water, a brief, beautiful vibration that will inevitably cease, leaving no echo in the vast, indifferent silence. The Inquisitor finally understands that his suffering is not a test, nor a lesson, but a purely random, unmotivated accident of biology. This final clarity, the utter lack of a comforting metaphysical framework, is what drives the mind beyond the limits of functional reality. The intellect, having achieved perfect objectivity, finds itself fundamentally incompatible with the emotional requirements of being human. For to live, one must hope. To strive, one must believe in consequence. To love, one must ignore the inevitability of total loss. The Inquisitor cannot perform these necessary acts of psychological negligence. He is crippled by his own knowledge. The language of this climax is often silence, or a series of desperate, profound pronouncements that sound like nonsense to the ears of the adapted. He might speak of the redness of ultimate zero, or the calculus of despair, or the symmetry of inevitable ruin. These are not random ravings. They are attempts to articulate the sheer, overwhelming beauty and horror of the realized cosmic truth, a truth that possesses aesthetic perfection but spiritual nullity. His vision encompasses the totality of history and future simultaneously. He sees the rise and fall of empires as mere fluctuations in energy transfer. He sees human love as a necessary evolutionary contract masquerading as destiny. He sees his own death, not as a tragedy, but as a minor, required adjustment in the balance sheet of the universe. This perspective, while intellectually dazzling, is psychologically fatal. The self, having nothing left to hold on to, no personal significance, no free will, no linear future, dissolves into the very background noise of existence. The Inquisitor has won the intellectual battle, achieving complete, unvarnished truth. But he has lost the war for his soul. He has become a lens, perfectly clear, but unable to generate light or warmth of its own. He is a consciousness that is aware of everything, yet belongs nowhere. His ultimate truth is a terrifying paradox. Complete understanding leads only to complete alienation. We must now draw the final, chilling implications from this terrifying journey. What duty does this knowledge place upon those of us who have glimpsed the shadows? And what is the lingering echo when the truth-seeker finally succumbs to the sheer weight of his own terrible illumination? The final stanza is upon us, demanding a cold, hard summary of our magnificent, doomed endeavor. The legacy of the Inquisitor, though, one who dared to look directly into the sun of realities, not one of martyrdom, but of warning. His fate demonstrates that there are truths too potent for the fragile human container, and that perhaps the most vital wisdom is recognizing the boundary between what can be known and what must be ignored. For the sake of functional existence, we leave this meditation not with comfort, but with a refined understanding of our necessary limitations. What have we learned from this agonizing clarity? We have learned that the sanity of man is not a sign of mental health, but a testament to his magnificent capacity for adaptive. We are protected by the veils of chronological time, the myth of sovereign will, and the persistent fiction of a unified self. These are not chains, but necessary anchors in the tempest of the infinite. To remove them is to be consumed by the very element we sought to master. Therefore, the ultimate philosophical conclusion is twofold and terrifyingly practical. Firstly, we must honor the limits of our perception, realizing that the filtering mechanisms of the brain are not flaws, but evolutionary masterpieces designed to preserve us from the abyss. And secondly, we must accept a profound loneliness that comes from glimpsing the truth. For those brief, cold moments of clarity forever separate us from the simple, warming delusion of the crowd. The Inquisitor, in his isolation, becomes a mere spectral reflection of our own potential downfall. He is the quiet reminder that true vision is often purchased at the cost of belonging. We must carry this knowledge that our comfortable world is an illusion without, allowing it to dismantle the necessary structures of our daily lives. This is the hardest discipline, to see the mechanism, and yet still choose to play the game. If the shadows we have explored have deepened your own understanding of the tragic elegance of existence, if this journey has left you colder, wiser, and more keenly aware of the necessary lies that sustain us all, do not let this realization dissipate into the fleeting chaos of the digital world. Engage with this message, share your own glimpse of the void in the comments below, that we might catalog the various shapes of the great darkness. For in sharing our terror, we briefly illuminate the path for others who feel the pull of the abyss. Do not mistake this conclusion for despair. It is merely the acknowledgement of gravity. We remain, despite our fleeting nature, creatures capable of magnificent, albeit temporary, endeavors. We build our fragile towers not because they will last, but because the act of building itself is a noble defiance against the certainty of ruin. Remember this, as you return to the comforting mediocrity of the observed world, to the necessary lies and the predictable rhythms of the clock. The truth does not set you free. It merely tells you the dimensions of your cage.